I've been hunting white-tailed deer in northern Wisconsin for almost 20 years. Hunting wasn't just a hobby where I grew up, it was part of life. My dad started taking me into the woods before I was even old enough to carry a rifle. At first I just walked behind him, trying not to make noise while he pointed out tracks in the mud, rub marks on young trees, and fresh deer beds hidden beneath patches of pine. By the time I was 16, I knew those woods almost as well as I knew my own neighborhood. My father wasn't the type of man who believed in ghost stories or supernatural nonsense. He was practical, quiet, and always had a logical explanation for everything. If someone claimed they'd seen Bigfoot, he'd tell you it was probably a black bear standing on its hind legs. If people talked about haunted cabins, he'd laugh and blame too much whiskey around the campfire. But there was one thing he never joked about. Every hunting season before we separated to our own tree stands, he'd remind me of the same rule. If the woods ever go completely silent, don't wait around trying to figure out why. Just leave. Whenever I asked him what he meant, he'd shrug and say, "You'll know it when it happens." He never explained any further. For almost 20 years, I figured it was just one of those old hunter traditions passed from one generation to the next. Hunters are full of little sayings like that. Never whistle in the woods. Never shoot unless you know exactly what's behind your target. Never ignore your instincts. I assumed the silence thing belonged in that same category. Then came November of 2022. The firearm season had just opened, and I decided to hunt a section of public land about 45 minutes north of my house. I'd hunted that property for years. It wasn't some remote wilderness where nobody ever went. It was popular enough that you'd usually see a few trucks parked at the entrance before sunrise, especially on opening weekend. I actually liked hunting public land because it forced me to work harder. The deer were smarter, moved less during daylight, and avoided the obvious trails everyone else watched. Over the years, I'd found a narrow funnel between two ridges where deer liked to travel just after sunrise. It wasn't marked on any map. It was simply something I'd discovered after spending dozens of mornings out there. The alarm went off at 4 that morning. Outside, the temperature was just below freezing. My truck windshield had a thin layer of frost that took several minutes to scrape away. I remember the heater barely keeping up as I drove through miles of empty back roads. The only other vehicles I passed were pickup trucks carrying blaze orange vests in the back windows. Every one of them was probably heading to the same forest. I pulled into the gravel parking lot around 6:15. There were already 4 other trucks parked there, which wasn't unusual. I recognized one of them from previous seasons. Hunters often return to the same spots year after year, even if they never actually meet. I geared up quietly, checked that my rifle was unloaded while walking in, clipped my flashlight to my jacket, and started down the familiar trail. The woods were beautiful that morning. Fresh frost covered every fallen branch, sparkling under the beam of my headlamp. My boots crunched softly across frozen leaves, while my breath drifted through the cold air in little white clouds. Somewhere off in the darkness, an owl gave one last call before disappearing into the trees. As the eastern sky slowly turned gray, the forest began waking up. First came the chickadees, then crows. A squirrel started tearing through dry leaves somewhere behind me. A woodpecker hammered against a dead oak in the distance. It was exactly the soundtrack you'd expect in northern Wisconsin during late November. Everything felt completely normal. I reached my tree stand around 8 o'clock. It was a lightweight climbing stand I'd used for years, positioned about 20 feet up a mature white oak overlooking the narrow game trail I'd found seasons earlier. From that height, I could see nearly 80 yards in every direction through the bare trees. After settling in, I chambered around, clipped my safety harness onto the tree, and waited. That's hunting. People who don't hunt think it's exciting every minute. But most of the time, you're simply sitting still, watching the woods breathe around you. You notice tiny things. A fox squirrel burying an acorn, a pileated woodpecker flying overhead. a gust of wind making one section of trees sway while another remains perfectly still. The hours passed slowly. Around 9:30, I spotted a pair of does crossing a ridge almost 100 yards away. They never came close enough for a shot, but seeing deer at all usually meant the morning was shaping up well. Then, sometime after 10, something changed. At first, I couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of one. The woodpecker stopped. The squirrels disappeared. The birds vanished. Even the constant rustling of dry leaves faded until the entire forest felt frozen in place. I've experienced quiet mornings before. This wasn't quiet. This was absolute silence. The kind that presses against your ears. The kind where your own heartbeat suddenly sounds too loud. Without even realizing it, I remembered my father's voice. If the woods ever go completely silent, leave. A strange knot tightened in my stomach. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe a coyote was moving through the area. Maybe another hunter had walked nearby and scared everything away. Then I heard it. Crunch, crunch. A single deliberate footstep, about 50 yards to my left. I slowly turned my head. Nothing. Another step. Crunch. Then another. Each one perfectly spaced apart, like someone taking slow, careful strides through ankle-deep leaves. At first, I assumed it had to be another hunter. Public land gets crowded during rifle season, and people sometimes wander farther than they intend. I expected to see someone wearing blaze orange appear between the trees at any second, but nobody did. The footsteps kept coming, steady, measured, always sounding closer. I leaned slightly against the tree to improve my angle, scanning every opening between the trunks. Still nothing. The sound was now close enough that I should have been able to see whoever was making it. Instead, the woods remained completely empty. I've been hunting elk in western Montana every October for the last 11 years. It's become something of a family tradition. Every fall, my younger brother, my cousin, and I take a week off from work, load our gear into 2 trucks, and drive into the mountains for 4 days. No hotels, no cabins. Just 3 grown men, a canvas wall tent, and miles of wilderness. The area we hunt isn't easy to reach. The nearest paved road is almost 12 miles away, and after the first couple of miles, there aren't even proper trails anymore. You follow old logging roads until they disappear, then navigate by GPS and landmarks. Once you're out there, you're completely on your own. No phone service, no electricity, no nearby campers. If something goes wrong, help isn't coming anytime soon. That's part of the reason we loved it. The silence, the fresh mountain air, the stars at night. It's one of the few places left where you can completely disconnect from the world. During the day, we'd spread out across different ridges looking for elk, then return to camp before sunset to cook dinner over a fire and sit around talking, until the cold drove us into our sleeping bags. Nothing unusual had ever happened during those trips, until October of 2023. That year, winter arrived early. By the second afternoon, light snow had started falling. It wasn't a blizzard, but enough to coat the trees and leave a fresh white layer over the ground. The temperature dropped well below, freezing after sunset, and by the time we crawled into the tent that night, our boots were already stiff with ice. Our camp was set in a narrow valley surrounded by thick pine forest. A small creek ran about 50 yards away, although by then it was mostly frozen over. We had one large canvas wall tent with a small wood stove inside. The fire kept the tent warm enough to sleep comfortably, but outside it felt brutally cold. Around midnight, I woke up for no obvious reason. For a few seconds, I just lay there listening. The fire inside the stove had nearly burned out, and the tent was quiet except for my brother's snoring. Then I heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Something was dragging against the outside wall of the canvas. At first I wasn't concerned. Black bears occasionally wandered through the area, even that late in the season. Although most had already begun heading toward their dens, it wasn't impossible for one to be searching for food. Bears sometimes investigate camps if they smell anything interesting. The scratching continued for maybe 15 seconds before stopping completely. I listened. Nothing. Just silence. I figured the animal had wandered off. Then, 3 slow knocks echoed through the tent. Tap. A few seconds passed. Tap. Then one final knock. Tap. The sound was deliberate. Not like a branch hitting the canvas. Not like an animal bumping into it. It sounded exactly like someone standing outside, knocking with their knuckles. By then my brother was awake too. Without raising his voice, he said, "Who's out there?" No answer. He waited another few seconds before reaching for his flashlight and unzipping the tent flap. The cold air rushed inside as he stepped out. My cousin and I followed a few moments later. Our flashlight beams swept across the entire campsite. Nothing. No people, no animals. No glowing eyes reflecting back from the trees. Just fresh snow stretching in every direction. The strange part wasn't that nobody was there. It was the snow. It had been falling steadily for hours. Any person or animal walking through camp would have left obvious tracks. There weren't any. The only footprints visible belonged to the 3 of us from earlier that evening. We circled the tent twice, checking behind trees and around the cooking area. Nothing. Eventually my cousin laughed and suggested a pine branch must have fallen onto the tent. It sounded reasonable enough. We zipped the tent closed, threw another log into the stove, and went back to sleep. I don't know exactly how much time passed before I woke up again. Maybe an hour, maybe less. This time there wasn't any knocking. Instead, something was slowly moving around the outside of the tent. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound circled us at a walking pace. Not random, not hurried. Almost like someone was dragging their fingertips across the canvas, while carefully walking around the entire tent. The scratching passed behind my head, then along my brother's side, then around toward the front entrance. Every few seconds it would stop, then continue again. Nobody inside the tent spoke. We simply listened. Then came something that still makes me uncomfortable thinking about it. A woman's voice. Very soft, very weak, almost as though she was freezing. "Help me." The words came from just outside the tent wall, no more than a few feet away. My cousin immediately sat upright. "Someone's out there." He started reaching for the zipper. Before he could touch it, my brother grabbed his wrist. "No!" He didn't say it loudly. He almost whispered it. My brother had spent nearly 8 years working as a game warden before changing careers. He'd dealt with lost hikers, injured hunters, mountain lions, black bears, just about everything those forests could throw at you. I'd never seen him scared, until that moment. He leaned toward us and quietly said, "Think about it." Neither of us answered. He continued, "Nobody hikes 12 miles into these mountains barefoot in the middle of a snowstorm." That sentence didn't make sense at first. Then I realized what he meant. If someone had walked to our camp, there should have been footprints. There weren't. The voice came again. "Please." It sounded closer this time, almost against the canvas. Not crying, not shouting, just softly asking for help. The kind of voice that immediately makes you want to respond. Every instinct told me to unzip the tent, to look outside, to see if someone was injured. But every bit of logic told me something was wrong. The scratching resumed, slowly circling us again. Every few minutes the voice would return. "Help me. I'm cold. Please." Sometimes it sounded like it was beside my sleeping bag. Other times near the stove. Then behind my brother. Always moving, always outside, never staying in one place. That continued for what felt like forever. I checked my watch once. It was 2:17 in the morning. The sounds finally stopped a little before 3. Not gradually, just gone. The silence afterward somehow felt even worse. None of us slept again that night. As soon as daylight broke, we unzipped the tent and walked outside. The valley looked exactly as we'd left it. Fresh snow covered everything. No footprints, no bear tracks, no wolf tracks, no mountain lion prints, nothing. Not even marks where something had brushed against the tent. It was as though the entire night had never happened. We searched the area for nearly an hour. Every tree, every bush, the creek, nothing. By then, none of us wanted to stay another night. We agreed to pack up camp early and hike back to the trucks. While taking down the tent, my cousin suddenly asked where our hunting knives were. Each of us kept a fixed-blade knife hanging from a hook just inside the entrance. All three were gone. At first, we assumed someone had packed them accidentally. We emptied every backpack, every storage bin, every duffel bag. Nothing. The knives had simply disappeared. No expensive gear was missing. Our rifles were untouched. Our food was still there. Only the knives. It made no sense. The hike back felt much longer than usual. Nobody talked very much. Every now and then one of us would stop and glance behind us without saying why. Late that afternoon, we reached an old ranger station near the trailhead. The building wasn't actively staffed anymore, but an elderly volunteer was there answering questions for hikers and hunters. He asked how our trip had gone. My brother hesitated before mentioning the strange voice we'd heard during the night. The old man asked exactly where we'd camped. When we described the valley, his expression changed immediately. He became very quiet. After a long pause, he said he'd been volunteering there since the late 1970s. Over the years, dozens of hunters had mentioned hearing voices in that same valley. Most ignored them. A few decided to investigate. Several of those hunters were eventually found wandering miles away from where they'd disappeared. Some were discovered nearly 2 days later, cold, exhausted, completely disoriented. According to the search reports, every one of them claimed they couldn't remember how they'd gotten there. The old volunteer never said the place was haunted. He never offered an explanation. He simply looked at us and said, "Some places in these mountains are better left alone." We loaded our gear into the trucks without saying much else. The drive home was unusually quiet. The following October, when hunting season came around again, none of us even suggested returning to that valley. There are thousands of square miles of public land in Montana. We picked a completely different area. To this day, we've never gone back, and every now and then, usually late at night, one of us will jokingly ask if anyone ever found those missing knives. Nobody laughs. Because deep down, all three of us know they weren't misplaced. Something took them. Whatever spent 40 minutes walking circles around our tent that night. We're just grateful it didn't decide to come inside.